Hi, welcome to Sunlight on Suffield. I'm Neil Hornish, and I'm joined here with Sandra Janik and Jim Irwin. Thank you for joining us. And tonight we're going to be talking about the town charter.
Good timing.
The town charter is one of the most important documents for a municipality. It defines the organization, the procedures, the duties and the organization of the town. And it's often something that people don't really think about. Every 5 years, the town charter is supposed to be reviewed. It doesn't have to be revised, but it should at least be reviewed to see if there are any changes, either for what the town is looking for or if there have been any statutory changes at the state level that need to be reflected in the ordinance. The last time the Suffield Charter was revised was back in 2021. And so we're a little bit ahead of schedule, but the Board of Selectmen decided to convene a charter commission for 2024 because this will be a presidential election. And that's actually a good idea. We'll get more voters, get about twice as many voters during a presidential election as you would during a municipal election. And even in 2021, which was a municipal election, even though it included pretty substantial changes to the town charter, the fact that the charter was on the ballot did not translate into many more voters than we would normally see in a municipal election. So the idea of having it during a presidential election to expose more voters is actually a good idea.
Yeah, I do. I think that's a great idea. I do. I love it. However, at least in this particular situation where we find ourselves today, the Charter Revision Committee, it's going to be a really tight time frame. They had some challenges. This committee was not formed until last night. The committee members were named last night.
And by last night, this is May
Oh,
2024,
I'm so sorry.
but yes, on May 15th it
May
was.
15th,
yes.
2024, yes. But in order for them to do the work that they need to do, they have to get together. They have to have 2 public meetings, one within 30 days from the date they're announced as a commission, and then they have to have another one to present their final recommendations before it goes to the Board of Selectmen. And then it has to go to the Board of Selectmen, who then has to do their research and do their work, and then they have to decide whether to move forward and pass it on for a referendum or whatever has to be done. That seems like a lot of time, but it really isn't, because whatever work they do has to be finalized and ready to go in order by mid-September if we want to get it on a ballot for the referendum. This is really, really tight. And in light of that, this year the Board of Selectmen have decided to include in the scope of this commission 3 things. They're looking at the town clerk position, the tax collector position, and the treasurer position, and they're going to look at those positions and decide whether they should continue to be elected positions or if they should be made into hired positions. Now, those are the only things that can be considered at this point, or under this scope.
Well, that's what the Board of Selectmen is asking for.
That is correct.
Considering,
correct.
Right, it's a very tight, so considering the time frame,
yes.
Why don't we just look at making these from elected to hired?
And that, I guess there's other things that could be looked at, but in order to look beyond that, they're going to have to go beyond November.
Most likely.
Yeah, well, there's a time crunch here, really. I mean, the Board of Selectmen really wants to get this in by, again, to get the maximum number of voters engaged in the process. If they end up wanting to make more substantial changes than this, it's going to be very difficult for them to pull off in the time frame that they've got. I mean, if they wanted to add things to it, they would end up probably having to call a separate commission to expand the scope after the November vote on these 3 or 4 minor issues. And if we did another one following that, the referendum would end up probably addressing more controversial issues than just the town clerk, the tax collector, and the treasurer. And one of the interesting things is that the first selectman believes that all of these positions, that they shouldn't be elected positions, that the elected positions of the town should not be paid positions. And he includes his own position in that opinion. He thinks the first selectman position should not be a paid position. He also thinks that if you change these positions to being hires, then there's more accountability. You would hire hopefully the most qualified person. The continuity over time and the longevity of the people in those slots would give them the power, empower them to at least push and drive through the programs and the decisions that they need to make without concerning themselves with whether or not they're going to gain or lose votes on a political basis, just to look at the good of the town and exercise their duties with that alone in mind.
Well, yeah, that's an awful lot to unpack there. There's a lot to look at. Let's start first with the continuity and longevity. Our current town clerk has been there for, what, 13 years? Or 9
no,
years.
about-
9
town
years.
clerk, about 9 years, yep.
And our current tax collector's been there for 13 years. That's an awful lot of longevity and continuity. So that we do have that where we are. Now the Treasury position has changed hands a little more frequently. And we also, the other thing to look at too, no matter whether it's a hired position or an elected position, probably more so, regardless either way, people do quit, people do change their mind, people do leave positions, and so there's always going to be turnover regardless of which. But now we're going to be seeing what we think is best for our town, I guess.
Yeah, there were some of the reasons why the first selectman suggested that these should be hired and not elected. Made me a little uneasy. Like you said, the people we have for the town clerk and tax collector, we've got the continuity and longevity. They've been in those seats for a
Absolutely.
long time. And if they're elected, I mean, during the election cycle, whoever's running has a chance to offer their resume to the voters and explain
Correct.
why they should have that
Right.
position. So I'm not necessarily sure that just making it a hired position would necessarily mean you're getting the most qualified person, that the first selectman would be able to make that decision better
Well,
than
that's
the
it.
voters.
The other, even if they're
Right.
hired positions, they're hired by the first selectman.
Right. It does open up the possibility for cronyism if, there's no guidelines as to what the first selectman should look for. So, I mean, there is a possibility if someone helped them out on a campaign, maybe they might get a job. Who knows? I'm not suggesting that has happened,
Right.
but
Right.
it is possible out there with any first selectman. And even though they're hired by the first selectman, if we get a new board of selectmen, there's nothing stopping them from firing those people and hiring their own people
Correct.
when they get elected.
Correct. And I guess, yeah.
Well, it seems to me that on one level, you're as you pointed out, you're putting an awful lot of power in the pocket of the first selectman, and it seems that some of taking those positions from being elected positions gives him an awful lot of power over those hires and his ability to influence the sorts of persons and the people who are making those decisions. So it's more like a consolidation of power within the first selectman's office rather than it's like the antithesis of what you get if you get a town manager. You have all of that power in the first selectman exclusively under a politically influenced situation.
Yeah, and I was particularly struck by his comment. I don't know exact words, but he said it would allow people to make the hard decisions without worrying about the voters. And to me, it's like, well, you should be worrying about the voters. That should be your thought. And it sounded to me almost like, are you hired for your loyalty to the first selectman, or are you hired for what you're going to do for the town and the voters? And as far as pushing policies forward, I can't say that I know exactly what their job entails, but I would think that the town clerk and the tax collector probably mostly follow statutory regulations in what their duties are.
Yeah,
So-
I think that's the case. And the other thing that I'm considering is the fact that if this group is trying to just replace those positions and nothing else, then there's no way that we have the time or the energies to focus on actually moving the town manager position forward. I mean, that you're sort of, I doubt that at the same time that you would be expanding the powers of the first selectman to hire these people, you would be taking those powers away by turning to a town manager form of government. It's sort of the left hand's not knowing what the right hand's doing if you're doing that.
Yeah. So
It's going to be an interesting process to
it's going to be interesting. And
follow.
as you mentioned, it's a tight time frame.
Yep.
So on the May 15th Board of Selectmen meeting, the board did convene a charter commission. It currently has 5 members on it. And interesting, in previous meetings when they were discussing it, one of the Selectman Chaffetz, suggested that no Board of Selectmen should be on this charter revision committee.
I remember that.
And I thought that was a good idea. There is, because it's a town committee, the first selectman is a de facto member.
Correct.
And I think last night, Selectman Harrington would be the representative for the first selectman.
Yep.
But I thought it was a good idea to keep it separate because the Charter Revision Commission has to report to the Board of Selectmen and they have to approve it. But before then, I think there should be a level of impartiality. So the Charter Revision can do whatever they think needs to be done and kind of avoid influence by the Board of Selectmen.
Right, because it's almost like they're the ones approving what the work is, that is being done.
Yeah.
The Board of Selectmen will be approving the work that's being done, so they really shouldn't be part of that initial work.
Yeah.
At least in my mind, in terms of just
Yeah.
common sense.
So for now, they did elect 5 people. Some members wanted 7, but it was decided to be 5 just because it's a short time frame and they need to get consensus. But more
Yep.
people could be added later.
Yep.
Well, I think that as we're considering this new Charter Revision Commission, the few things that we need to consider from recent events that could impact the way that this whole thing runs. First is what actually happened with the last Charter Revision Commission. The other thing we should consider is what has happened recently with the management of the Kent Memorial Library. And finally, we should consider whether it makes sense to create that town manager position. I mean, for example, to address the previous Charter Commission, it met for over a year. I mean, we are on a very short time frame here comparatively. It met from July of 2020 until August of 2021. And the process itself had many problems. I mean, one problem was the untimely submission and review of the meeting minutes. In fact, there were no minutes at all posted for the last 2 sessions, which included the public meeting and the comments by the selectmen. Those minutes are still, I'm sure they're out there someplace, but they aren't on the town website. Fortunately, there are apparently audio recordings. I haven't taken the time to listen to them yet.
Well, the audio recordings were made, but we have to remember this was during the height of COVID, and they were just starting to make audio recordings. So at the time, I don't know how many people realized.
And how many of us could have actually accessed them or known what to do with them if we
Well, and
had.
the other thing is that the minutes themselves for the actual early meetings they started meeting in July of 2020. The first minutes for any meetings that I could find posted were posted October.
Ooh, that's a long
Which-
time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
That's a
so
long time.
so this was well after the meet. I mean, if I had wanted to be following along from home, which I occasionally do with town politics, I would have no idea what was going on for months
Yeah.
in this process. And so the the fact that those minutes were that late, I mean, it doesn't just hinder the transparency and public participation in the process. It's actually illegal in that it violates the Freedom of Information Act, which says that you put your minutes out there in a timely fashion.
And you know, one of the other things to sort of go along with that is that particular Charter Revision Commission was almost entirely of inexperienced people by design. The board, there were people who had prior experience with charter revision and on commissions who put their names out there, and they were turned down specifically for that reason, because they wanted someone, the stipulated reason was they were looking for people without charter revision experience. I will admit to being naive, but it seems to me that that's kind of a narrow approach to take, my own personal viewpoint. It's either a very narrow viewpoint to take, or it's perhaps more designed to move matters along or make it easier to influence members of the board who don't exactly know when they're supposed to do such things as minutes or do whatever. And I'm not accusing anyone. I'm just saying that there seems to be a lot of reason for, I don't see a lot of reason to have a lot of inexperienced people when you have people stepping forward. And I'll admit, I don't know the people who were announced last night as the members. Don't know them at all, but I would strongly encourage everyone to reach out in our town. I would very much encourage everyone to reach out to the members. You can find them online, and talk with them. Talk with them about your, ask your questions, give them your input. That's what we have. That's why we have,
Yeah,
community members.
This is something that should definitely have a lot of public input. And like you said, for the last one to say, well, we don't want experienced people, the importance of this document, I mean, it's so important to just say we don't want experienced people on
Right,
this
it
committee is ridiculous. But let's jump over to the second item you thought should be discussed, the Kent Memorial Library. So there's been a lot of discussion about that between the ordinance and what the charter says.
Yeah, a lot of that is in reference to who has the power to hire. A lot of it is. Now, I'm going to read this, so please forgive me for being seemingly rude here, but I want to make sure I get it right. The town had referenced Town Ordinance 71-4, subsection B, which clearly states that the Library Commission has the power and duties to, quotes, employ a chief librarian. This was last revised in 1972. The town council, that's
The
our
town
town
attorney,
attorney,
yeah.
Mr. Donnelly, has since provided a letter of opinion that the Library Commission does not have this power and that the power falls to the first selectman. In his letter of opinion, he mentions that over time, the charter has reassigned power away from the Library Commission, and the ordinance should be revised to reflect the updates of the charter. Now, the charter paragraph 501 states the first selectman shall be, quotes, the full-time CEO, chief executive officer, and chief administrative officer of the town. Some folks have pointed at this statement and concluded that that means the first selectman has the sole authority over hiring the library director. But if you look at Charter paragraph 502E, it states the first selectman shall supervise the administration of the affairs of the town, except those matters which by charter or by ordinance are exclusively committed to the Board of Education and other boards or commissions. To me, I mean, it's the Library Commission. It gives it the power to the Library Commission.
Yeah,
It seems pretty clear to me. I don't.
Right, so you've got one section that they're
Yeah.
pointing to saying he's the chief executive officer,
Right.
therefore he gets to make a decision.
Right.
But right below that, there's another saying his powers are limited
And
by ordinances that give powers
To
to
the
other boards.
commissions.
And we have
Yes.
an ordinance that gives the power to employ a chief librarian to the library commission.
Seems kind of straightforward.
Yeah, and also you mentioned that opinion letter from the town attorney. He also referenced Charter Section 901. But if you read Charter Section 901, that just talks about policies and dealing with personnel. It doesn't even mention hiring capabilities.
Okay.
Well, and I think it should be noted here that the charter revision that was voted in 2021, the expansion of the powers of the first selectman in 502 to enforce the human resources functions of the town, was defeated by over 300 votes. The people spoke out against giving the selectman that authority that the town attorney is now claiming that he actually has. Also, the decision-making power over the employment that he says falls to the first selectman, or the Connecticut Municipal Employees Relations Act, the MIRA Commission, or the town labor contracts, or the town's human resource policies as approved by the Board of Selectmen. In 1203, it was attempted to amend Section 1203 to require town HR to employ all town employees except for the Board of Education, and that one failed by an even larger margin. So it seems like no matter what the people say, the town attorney is going to say that the first selectman has a right to do this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and you mentioned some of the ballot questions from the last one. There were, I think, 14 ballot questions concerning the charter. The last, half of them, half passed, half were voted down.
Yes.
And a lot of people, I think, the ones that were voted down were seen as an attempt to consolidate power under the first selectman. So glad they were voted down. And also you mentioned from the town attorney's letter of opinion, the MIRA, the town contracts, the HR policies, those were all referenced as sources as to why the first selectman has the power to do that. But if you read through those, and I read through them, I didn't see anything that talked
says
about
that.
hiring. And I actually went to a library commission meeting before they recommended the new chief librarian to the first selectman. And I pointed that out and I said, from what I could see, I don't see anything in here that supports that claim. So maybe you should ask the town attorney to address explicitly in these documents where it says it. I don't think they took my suggestion.
You don't think so?
I suspect they did not.
So, okay, so what all this means, if I can summarize to
please
point,
do.
is that we have to stay vigilant. There's been a charter revision committee that's been formed. The Board of Selectmen said, look, just look at making these 3 positions hired instead of elected. But once the Charter Revision Commission is formed, they can look at whatever they want. They can recommend anything they want.
I mean,
The board has to approve it. The Board of Selectmen have to approve it. But there are no limits as to what they do.
no, when they come back at their first public hearing, within the 30 days after the formation of the committee, what do they present at that point? Do they present the scope of their work, the approach of what they're going to do, what they've done so far? What exactly do they present when they do their public meeting?
Well, I've never been on the commission.
Right.
But no, they have to have a public hearing at the beginning, like you said.
Okay, that's within
They
30
don't-
Days.
Right. I don't think they have to report what the results of that public meeting
No,
to
but I
the
mean,
board, but they
but-
have to consider the
But I
comments.
mean, in terms of the public, they have to, that is going to attend this meeting. I mean, I presume that's what it is, right?
it's a public
meeting.
hearing, yeah.
So at that point, is that the purpose of that, to sort of tell people what's going on? This is what we're doing, this is how we're going to do it.
Well-
We're looking for feedback. I mean, what happens there? I mean,
It's what happens there is what they decide is going to happen there, because they are pretty much an autonomous organization within the government. They do report back to the Board of Selectmen, which is another autonomous organization within the town government. My largest concern is that it's very simple from the library's point of view and from this commission's point of view. If they decide that they want to, for example, the Library Commission is currently defined by the state as a governing board, which means that they make decisions and they tell the town how the library is going to run. With the stroke of a pen, the Charter Commission can change that and say that we now, in the new charter, refer to it as an advisory board, and that all they can do is give advice. That one word change that could be included in the change to the charter could effectively transfer all decision-making power to the town and the political whim of the moment. And I think that is the most dangerous thing that we are looking at from this potential commission is what are they going to do that they aren't telling us yet?
Right. And also, when it gets on a ballot, if something gets on a ballot, it does not have to be itemized like the previous election. It could just be one sentence. Do you accept all the changes suggested by the Charter Revision Committee?
Really? I thought-
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, it does
So-
not have to. We don't
Okay,
get to pick and choose. It's not a Chinese menu here. You get whatever
It
you
could
order.
be. It could be.
But I
Hopefully,
mean, but the last revision, weren't they all itemized on the ballot?
they were. They were. And
So
hopefully they would be again, but it's not
they don't have
required.
to.
Yeah.
So that literally they could say, it could be a one sentence thing, do you accept it or not?
Yeah.
Yes.
And by accepting, you could be accepting those 3 position changes as well as anything
As
else
as
that was there.
whatever-
And the only way you're going to know is if you're paying attention.
Right.
Okay,
So, and
which-
that's the take-home point.
Pay attention.
Pay attention.
Ask
It's-
questions.
Right. It's incumbent upon us as citizens to pay close attention. And unfortunately, we don't have time to talk about the town manager, but that's a whole other
Whole other
episode, I think.
It certainly could be.
Thank you,
I thank
Sandra.
you. Thank you.
Jim. And remember, you can find Sunlight on Suffield on Facebook. We're on YouTube, or you can shoot us an email if you have any comments or suggestions for future episodes. And
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
yeah,
You bet.
Absolutely.
and thank you very much. We'll see you next time.